Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm here today to share with you my, what month is it, June, reading wrap up. And if you're new, I share my reading wrap ups in the moment as I finish each book and then put them all together. So the book I finished this week was Haven by Emma Donoghue, and I listened to this on audio. This book was narrated by, I will insert his name here. He also narrated Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These, and I recognized his voice right away, so it was nice to have that familiar voice narrating the story. Haven came out in 2022, I believe, and is the story of three monks who travel to the Skellig Rock outside of Ireland in the Atlantic Ocean to set up a monastery. There are three monks, Art, Trinan, and Cormac, and they kind of represent a really interesting triad of middle-aged, older, and young. And they head out after Art, who is seen as this very prestigious monk who's traveled, who is very respected in the community, has a vision that they are supposed to go out on their own and remove themselves from human contact and create a sacred place for them to be in closer to God. So it is quite religious in the sense that it is a version of Christianity from the 7th century that is very literal in a lot of ways. And one of the debates in the book, one of the themes of the book, is this kind of literalness to what do you take literally from scriptures? What do you act out literally as someone who is trying to live a Christian life? And what do you interpret differently? And how the kind of pagan beliefs tie into the new Christian religion, because it seems well established, but it also seems like there are people who in their lifetimes have converted to Christianity from paganism. It has a lot of desolate landscape because they're living literally on a rock that has one tree and no fresh source of water. So it's a survival story. It's a survival story in like the basic terms of survivalist, where you are using what you have to survive. And they are very isolated. There's no other people there. And as the story progresses, their isolation affects each of them differently and affects the relationships of the monks to each other differently. And there is a lot of, the only thing that's really on this island in abundance is birds who are roosting and nesting there. And so there is a lot of killing of those birds and eating of those birds. So if that's something that you find hard to read about, then I would caution you, this story does have a lot of kind of explicit killing of these animals, because as time goes on and they run out of the food they've brought with them, the birds become more and more crucial to their survival on this rock. So I am a big fan of Emma Donoghue. This is my 4th book of hers, and when I finished it, I thought, oh, all the others have been 5 stars. This one, I don't know if it's a 5-star. And so I put my Goodreads rating at 4.5 because it was so close. But the longer I've been thinking about the book, the more I just admire, and this is always true of her books for me, her ability to create relationships between the characters. That is my favorite part of her writing. She just has this way with interrelation that is so satisfying as a reader, because even when you hate a character, and there was definitely a character in this book that I hated by the end, she redeems the story through another relationship that is just so heartwarming and so feels so life affirming. I find her writing very life affirming, which I think, when you're going through times like these where there's so much going on, so much strife in the world, and you can read something that has an affirming feeling about humanity, like there is goodness there, like underneath it all the good things sometimes happen too. It is a very comforting thing to read about. So so that is my review of Haven by Emma Donoghue, and I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hey everybody, so I finished 2 books today, so I wanted to share my thoughts on them with you. One of them is Bird's Art Life by Maclear. I started this just at the end of May. It was part of my May TBR, but finished it up today, which is, what day is it today? I think it's June 9th. So so this is a memoir, and this was on my 5-star predictions list for 2024. Didn't quite get 5 stars from me, fortunately, but I did really enjoy it. So it's very much a book that's compiled. So it's a few different types of things together. There are sketches in here that Maclear did about birds. There's the story of her being accompanied by a birder who's a photographer of birds and a musician. And he kind of takes her under his wing, pun not intended, throughout a year and teaches her all he knows about urban birding specifically. So this takes place in Toronto, Ontario. And what happens over the course of this year is that life happens, things happen in Kayo's life. Like her father is experiencing a debilitating illness, and so she's caring for him. She's looking after her kids. She has some different things happen with friends, and she also has some observations about life and art and being a creative person. So she kind of mixes them all together. She also mixes in research that she's done, so she shares different famous people over the years who were interested in birds. There's also, I can't remember what the other section, what she was sharing, but there's photographs, there's little drawings, and it's, one of the things I took away from the book the most was when she talked about small things, and small things can be important, and why does everything have to be big and large and monumental to be important or to be relevant. And I thought that was a really interesting, especially as an artist, thing to contemplate, where we have this idea that things have to be big and you have to go huge and you have to, have this monumental career. But really there's value in small things, and there's value in intimacy and little pockets of things. And I really liked that idea and how she conveyed that idea. So, like I said, it wasn't a 5-star for me. I think the delivery was maybe just a little bit too remote feeling in some ways. And I also found it strange that she referred to the man that she went around with looking at birds as the musician, because it really removed him as a person. It made him more of this figure instead of like a person with a personality, even though she talks about him. But I just found the title of the musician to be a little bit alienating, and she mentions his full name in the acknowledgments, so I just found it strange. I thought, well, he was so generous with his time, and he spent time with you, and you're talking about him, so you should be using his name and not referring to him as the musician. But that's just like a personal preference that I had about the book. But overall, I think it's a lovely little book, and I'm glad that I read it. And the other book that I finished is my read with my son Elliot, The Lost Explorer, Finding Mallory on Mount Everest by Conrad Anker and David Roberts. So this is a dual reportage style of book where Conrad Anker and David Roberts share. Conrad Anker was on Everest and found Mallory's body in 1999. And David Roberts is sharing the history of the 1924 Mount Everest expedition, and they kind of go back and forth in the text. So there'll be, a chapter in which both of them speak, and then they share these different, one a more overall historical perspective, and one like a personal perspective on what it was like to find Mallory's body. And it's very interesting. There's a lot of technical mountaineering terms, which, Elliot and I were not familiar with. But I think one of the most interesting parts of this was the time that it happened, which was, the burgeoning internet news system, pre-social media. And Conrad Anker talks about how even though they were trying to shroud this in mystery and only have one specific news outlet releasing the fact that they found Mallory's body, they weren't successful in that. Like, it leaked, and then it got out on the internet, and then there were tabloids that got the photographs, and all these things that happened. I don't remember anything about this at all, even though I was of age at that time, and I don't think I spent much time looking at the news in 1999. But I found that really interesting, because if you think about the context of this now, it would like instantly be in the world, and someone would put it on Instagram, and so you think about that in relation to the type of internet technology that Conrad Anker was referring to at this time, and it's amazing how different it is. So there was also the kind of controversy of disturbing Mallory's resting place. So they did take items off of his dead body, and they did look at his body to try to determine whether he'd experienced frostbite, for instance, because there's this really huge mystery of what happened to Mallory and Irvine on that climb, and if they summited the mountain before they were killed, before they died, and all these sorts of things are very much shrouded in mystery. And a lot of the climbers at the time who were part of that expedition believed that Mallory and Irvine, out of how amazing they were as climbers, they were able to do that. And Conrad Anker then gives his hypothesis based on his experience of summiting Everest and climbing it and seeing the body, and doing his making calculations based on his climbing experience. He then gives his opinion on whether or not he thinks they summited the mountain. So I think it was really entertaining. It was very interesting to read. I think that it was really well written. I mean, I think it was written in a lot of ways for people who are into mountaineering, but not being into mountaineering personally, and just being interested in, Everest as a place that people go to for this extreme level of adventure and extreme level of challenge. I found this to be, really, really compelling book. Yeah, so those were my two that I finished today, and I will check in again with you when I have finished another. Hey everybody, I just wanted to check in. I finished The Tradition by Jericho Brown. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning collection of poetry, and it's very good. I really enjoyed, I think I enjoyed the first part the most. I think the poems in the first part were the most, they just drew me in the most, and then the subsequent sections I still enjoyed, but just not as much. There wasn't anything that stood out to me as much. And there is an interesting thing that he did in here that I've never seen in another poetry collection, and that is using the same title for poems. The poem's titled Duplex. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 different poems titled that, which I thought was really interesting. I don't really know why he would do that. I've never seen another poet do that as well, because I'm not sure how you would tell them apart if they all have the same title. And but unless you're reading the content of them. So anyway, super, super interesting, super glad that I read this. And I think that it's as always, it's important to see the different perspectives that poetry collections like this can give you on being a black gay man in the United States. So yeah, really enjoyed this. I'll check in again when I have finished another book. Hey everybody. So I finished a second audiobook for June this week, and I wanted to wrap it up with you. This book was called Seven and is by Farzana Doctor. So I had never heard of this book before. I had never seen it anywhere before. I was just looking through the Libby app and looking for something to listen to. And this actually came out in 2020, so I'm wondering if that might be part of why I never heard of it, because so much that happened in 2020 got very, put under the, things came out and people didn't talk about them or know about them because everyone was dealing with what we were all dealing with in 2020. So, oh, that's my creaky chair. Sorry, I'll try to sit differently. So this was a really interesting read, and I think the reason that it appealed to me was because I'd never read anything about this specific community. It's a specific religious community based out of India, a sect of Islam. The Bora community was what it was referred to for short. And in this community, they have a practice called Khatna, which is a form of female genital mutilation. It is not the form that we talk about the most, which is the one practiced in some African countries, which is removing the labia, removing the clitoris, and removing a lot of the entire genital area for women. But this is a very small cut that happens to the clitoris. And it basically is, obviously, as all genital mutilation is, it is a way to try to control women's sexuality. And it's done to girls in the community when they are 7 years old. And it is a rite of passage. It is considered to be a way to keep these women pure. So the story follows Sharifa, who has grown up in the United States with a Bora husband who has also grown up in North America, and their daughter, Z, who is actually 7, and they end up going to India for a sabbatical. And during this time, they obviously are encountering their family, and Sharifa had been in contact with her very extended family, large family, over the years, and she'd been back to India many times. And so there's actually quite a few arcs in the story, and I would say, when I read the reviews of the book, that there's definitely some problems with the overall way the book was put together. So one, some of the details of the language go a bit too far into, what would you call it? I think you would call it, some people would refer to chick lit, but I would say contemporary lit, that is just a bit too basic in terminology and shares a bit too much information. So a bit too much about what you're eating, a bit too much about what you're wearing, a bit too much about details of relationships that aren't as important to the main part of the story. And there's a lot of characters in the book because there is also another timeline, and this timeline is a ancestor of Sharifa who was kind of held up as this famous member of their family who built himself up out of poverty in a small village and moved to the bigger city and became an entrepreneur and became a philanthropist in the community and has this reputation. So what she ends up deciding to do when she goes back to India for her husband's sabbatical is to research this member of her family. And during this time of research, with 2 of her close cousins, who she would almost consider to be sisters, she uncovers the practice of Khatna and how it has affected her and the lives of the women around her. She uncovers more about this male ancestor, about the culture, it's about secrecy, it's about shame. It is about, like I said, there are some parts of the book that I think should have been edited down. There are some parts that are kind of awkward and clunky with the language. But I think the power of this story and why I liked it so much was because it's about women. It's about women telling the truth about their bodies, understanding their bodies, understanding the difference between tradition and culture and discrimination, and trying to negotiate those things in a specific culture. And I think that's really important because, especially as Western women and Western feminists, we tend to impose our ideas of freedom and emancipation onto women of other cultures, and it is not okay to do that. All women have to come to this place of self-empowerment in their own way. And those were the parts of the book that I found to be very powerful and very impactful to me. And they were very emotional to me. And I felt very invested in the characters. And so the flaws in the novel were things that I could overlook. The other part of the book that I wanted to just bring to your attention, in case it's something that bothers you, is that because this book is about female genital mutilation, it does also talk about sex. So there's some parts of Sharifa's life and sex life that are kind of explicitly discussed in the story. And to me, some people found that part gratuitous in the reviews. I didn't find it gratuitous. I thought it was an interesting way to help people understand the impact of something. Especially, I think, if you are from the Bora community, you may not understand the psychological impact of this practice. And so I think that was the point of sharing more intimate details of Sharifa's sex life, because they were trying to convey the idea of how insidious this practice can be, and how it affects women differently, and how it's a spectrum, and why you can't say, well, you're just an exception to the rule in terms of eliminating the practice in the culture. So really interesting. I learned a lot in it. And I think that's, one of the main things I like to do when I'm reading fiction and nonfiction, is to learn about other cultures and other ways of looking at the world. And I think this book definitely does that. And I thought the ending was quite powerful and really impacted me. So overall, I would say it's worth reading through listening. I actually listened to this on audio, which I already said, and there are 3 narrators in the audio. I thought it was a really powerful experience for listening, so I would recommend. Okay, I'll check in again when I finish another book. Hey everyone, so I have 2 books to wrap up for you today. The first one is Stories of Oka by Isabelle St-Amand, and this was translated from the French by S.E Stewart. So this book refers specifically to an event called the Oka Crisis, which happened in the summer of 1990 and went on for 78 days. It was a protest created by the indigenous peoples of Kanesatake and Kahnawake in Quebec, which is some areas outside of Montreal, because the town of Oka wanted to expand a golf course, and in doing so destroy some burial grounds of the tribe of Kanesatake. And they put up a barrier to prevent that from happening. And it became a very volatile conflict in which a police officer died. And it also was a very important defining moment for the people of Ganasatake and Ganawage, because they had been enduring encroachment of their land for hundreds of years since contact. And so what Isabelle St-Amand does in this book is she analyzes the event itself, plus some documentary films that were made about it, and also the subsequent literature that's been written about it. So novels by both settlers and by Indigenous people, and poetry collections and different things like that. So what this was for me was a really great overview of a lot of the literature and film that had been made about this event. And then I subsequently have gone and watched some of them, and will subsequently read some of them. And these are kind of hard to source, actually, especially because I live on the other side of Canada. So this incident is probably not as in the forefront of people's minds here as it was where I grew up in Quebec, because this happened when I was about 12 years old. And so I was doing this research for artwork that I'm creating about this incident, and about like the education around Indigenous issues that I had growing up in the 80s and 90s. And so this was really, really informative for me. It helped me understand the conflict and understand what happened at that time, and especially watching the documentary film that is analyzed quite extensively in this book. I found that it was super informative and helpful for me in terms of understanding what happened in the conflict, and it's very layered. There's a lot of things going on here, but ultimately this was a really important moment for Indigenous peoples across Canada and across North America. Actually, there were actually Indigenous peoples coming from as far away as Mexico to be in solidarity with this movement. And so it was a really important moment, and I'm really glad that I was able to delve into it deeper and understand it more extensively through reading this book. And then my other finish is one of the novels I was reading for June, Astrid and Veronika by Linda Olsson. And this is just the sweetest little novel, and I'm really, really glad that I read this. I liked it from almost instantly. Linda Olsson's writing style is very poetic. She has a beautiful sensibility about writing about nature. And this is the story of Astrid and Veronika. Astrid is an older woman living in a small village in Sweden, and she's a recluse. She's referred to by the town as a witch. And one day, a younger woman in her early 30s drives up to stay in the house that is just across the road from Astrid's. And Veronika has her own past, her own pain that she's working through. She is originally from Sweden, but has lived all over the world and has moved into this little house to try to finish her second book. And so through this proximity, the two women become friends. And this book is about their friendship. This book is about your past, your memories, processing pain, living your life on your own terms. It's a beautiful novel about a relationship. And I think that it really, for me, it was very heartwarming. It was very, I think some people would think this is kind of sentimental writing, but I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. I think sometimes you want to read something that's got some beauty and heartfeltness and some beautiful musings about life and acceptance of your faults as a person, and the way life can overwhelm you, and fate comes in and you have no control over things, and then other things you do have control over. it kind of, the main part of the story takes place from about spring to the end of summer. So I would call this a really beautiful novel to read in the summer. It's actually quite short, so I think you could read this in one sitting if you wanted to. I think it would be a beautiful novel to take on a vacation, for example, because it's just got that very evocative atmosphere to it that really puts you in the place. You are absorbed by these this small Swedish village, these old houses with smells and the way the light falls across them. They take lots of walks in nature, in the forest and by lakes, and so you really get this sense of like the seasons and the rhythms of nature. And yeah, it's just a really lovely novel. I will definitely be reading. I was just looking up some of Linda Olsson's other work, and she has another novel, I think her third, this was her debut, that sounds really appealing to me. And so I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for it. I'd never heard of this. I just found this in a secondhand bookshop. I really think, like, for me, reading this was kind of a testament to when you're secondhand book shopping and you're kind of just looking through the titles and a title like appeals to you, or I mean, this is a beautiful cover as well, and you just pick it up and you read the back and it sounds intriguing and you just take a chance on it. I mean, I was so happy that I found this little gem. And it's also female friendship is a really important it's an area, it's a topic of interest for me in novels. I find it very rewarding to read about female friendship. I think it's because in novels I find that there's a lot of like women's relationships are often used to be vehicles for the tension in novels, and I find it very refreshing and rewarding when women just come together and support each other and share and have those deep, intense bonds. I think that is just such a rewarding thing to read about for some reason for me. So I would recommend this one if you like reading about those things too. And I think I should be finishing one more book this month, so I will check in with you when I have finished it.